Did we lose you, Ken?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. Are you doing the slides? I thought you were going to do them.
I was going to present. If you could speak, that'd be good.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. To the working group, Kent and I were both waiting for each other. Apologize about that. To get started. Welcome to Netmod at IETF 110. This is our one and only session. It's also the last session of the day, of the week, of the meeting. So hopefully we can maintain some amount of energy, and that our slow start is not an indication for the session. So apologize for that, and let's keep moving. Next, please. Oh, I should introduce my co-chair. So I have Kent Watson is here. He's projecting. Joel Jegley is also online, and he's helping out with the notes. You'll notice in the chat session, there's a link to CodeMD. We really would like everyone to jump on and help us capture what's said during the session. Next, please. We are still at the IETF, not for much longer, but we are still at the IETF, which means that all our contributions, all our actions are governed by our policies. The full list is below, and you can find a shortcut to it by going to the note well. If you're unfamiliar with this, it's really important to be familiar with it. It applies to both how we interact with each other, and also that basically anything we say here becomes part of our permanent record. And anything you contribute to the IETF has also certain contribution rules to it. Next. We are using Meet Echo. If you're listening live, you know that because you're here. Thank you for joining. The blue sheet is automatically captured. We still have Jabber and chat. If you'd like something to be read into the mic, please put @mic in front of it. And we are also being recorded, and the video of the session is going to be published via YouTube. We already talked about joint minute taking. 5 people have jumped on. Please, more people jump in. It's in the chat session. If you click the little chat button, you'll have a link right there. It'll be easy to get there. And help us capture the minutes, and also capture the discussions are that they're accurate there. Next, please. So our agenda is pretty much unchanged. We had some minor tweaking. We had a TBD that's been filled in, but from a high order agenda perspective, there's no changes. Next, please. Since the last meeting, we've had one RFC published. That's always great to see RFCs come out. Those are the things, that's why we're here, right? And it's to publish standards. So thank you for all who contributed and reviewed it and contributed to this work. We have one in RFC editor queue. I think this document may have been in process the longest in our working group. I'm not sure if it holds the record, but we're up at Rev 26. We'd love to see it done. The shepherd is Kent, so if he wants to say anything, just go unmute and jump in. If not, I'm going to keep going. We have. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly. So everyone may recall that this draft was in progress a few years back. Sorry to say, and it came to a point of, do we want to publish it using just TCP, or wait for having a TLS based transport? And since only IETF standardized the TLS based transport, we felt that it was necessary. We as working group felt it was necessary to wait until the TLS client server work in the NetConf working group completed, which is actually shortly to being completed, and hopefully we'll then resurrect this document for publication at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. We have a couple of other documents that have been submitted to the ISG for publication. I don't think there's anything worth noting there. They're pretty, they're just following the process. I see Rob Wilton is in queue. I think he's preempting me on the post last call, where I was going to try to put him on the spot, and here he is jumping in. Rob, please go ahead.
No, you put me on the spot for that in a moment. As just on the NMDA diff draft, I've provided comments back. I think Andy was asking whether that needed any in terms of the changes that we need any confirmation from the working group. So I would like to put that to the chairs to decide whether anything is required there, or otherwise just whether the authors can make the markups and then I can progress that document. So I don't need an answer now, but just to make you aware in case you weren't.
Well, from a general process standpoint, what we have followed is that we ask that any requested changes be discussed on the list and give the list an opportunity to say no, to chime in. Unless it is something that requires going back to the working group, for the document to be sent back, we typically do not ask for explicit OKs. Of course, the shepherd, that's a general statement. I don't know if Joel wants to make a specific statement.
I mean, that sounds like what we would do is basically like, does anybody have any objections to these proposed changes? And if not, then we will move on to IETF last call.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, I think the changes are pretty minor. I don't think anything else is required, but Andy was questioning that. So
just publish it on the list and move on. It's not, unless there's something that really needs an explicit okay. What we've always done is any changes that come in during ISG processing, we just make sure the list is aware so that if someone wants to chime in, they can. That's what we've always done, so I'm not sure why we would do anything different here.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so stay around. Rob, don't go far. This is my opportunity to put Rob on the spot. So post last call, we have 3 documents. They've been sitting there quite a while. There was one minor set of changes that were requested and discussed on the list. And I thought that they were, so I'm talking about the first 2 documents, interface Yang extension and sub-interface VLAN. I thought those changes were made, but I'm not 100% sure. But nonetheless, the drafts are expired. Rob, what is your plan here as author?
So they are progressing very slowly. So the key issue at the moment that needs to be solved is in the sub-interface VLAN model draft, there is some text in the appendix that refers to the IEEE Yang models. And Don, I don't know if he's participated today, said that text was inaccurate. So I've been trying to get that text agreed with IEEE Yangsters, like informal liaison with IEEE. I've been a bit slow because I've missed some of their meetings, and so it's taken a lot longer to get to that stage of working out what to do with that text. I think we now have an action of what to do, so it's just a matter of updating that appendix text, I think, and a few other minor changes, and I think hopefully we're ready to go. So that's the last thing. I should hopefully be able to clear that in the next month or 2, I hope, and then be able to progress these onwards.
Yeah, that would be great. This is a case where if we were in the room, it would be a lot easier, but Scott Mansfield is presenting with a Yangster's hat on. Maybe chat with him and the participants, make sure you guys are in sync on whatever needs to happen there with that synchronization between the IETF and IEEE. If you need anything more, if you're done, great. I see Balaj in queue. My guess he wants to talk about file format.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
I had 2 such drafts, file format and the Yang push capabilities. I am in the process of updating them. I have already updated one of them, the other one, and I'll work on this one as well. Let's say, hopefully next week I'll be able to update it.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. Next slide, please. We've had no incoming liaisons. This is actually a slide, I think that this is my fault that I didn't take off the to be discussed during the meeting. That was from the last meeting. So my apologies for that. That last bullet is just a holdover. So if you think we have an outgoing liaison, please let us know. But at this time, we don't expect any. Next. Another typo here, obviously 110 is online, 111 is still TBD, but I think we're all used to working online at this point, and we just don't know how long it's going to continue. The virtual meetings, we can definitely continue supporting them. the informal meetings, which are regular and published on published to the working group. I think those are really good tools. Even once we go back in person, maybe that's something we will continue doing just to keep the ball moving in the working group. But if you have a topic that you would like to sort of make the whole working group aware of and work through using the working group resources, including the WebEx, please just contact the chairs. That's the last slide, so ready to move on. So over to you, Kent, for coordinating.
So just taking a moment to switch between slides, bringing the next setup right now.
Okay, thank you. Jason, are you in the room?
Yep. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is just a brief update on all the versioning work that's going on. We've got a number of drafts and doing some weekly meetings, and so I'm just kind of presenting a high-level status on that to the working group here. So on to the next slide. So we're going to have 3 presentations around this work today. My overview, and then Rashad's going to talk about the module versioning draft, and Joe is going to be talking about the Yang semantic versioning draft. Those are 2 of kind of the most critical fundamental drafts for this work. Continue on. Overall, there's kind of 5 main drafts for this work. The first 2 on this list are the ones that Rashad and Joe will present. And just to remind people, there's also a series of other drafts that are underway. The Yang packages draft, version selection draft, and then kind of a tooling, a schema comparison tooling draft. And you can find all this work and the issues and the latest drafts at the link I show here below on GitHub. All right, next slide. So we're holding weekly calls. On the list, I usually send minutes and usually remember to put a link to the weekly meetings in those minutes, but you can search back if you can't find the link, and everyone's welcome to join. We've shifted our focus in the last 3 or 4 months back to the module versioning and Yang Semver drafts. So those are 2 of the kind of fundamental ones. We had a number of major difficult issues that were still open, and Rashad and Joe will address those. In order to try to progress them, we held 2 Netmod virtual interims. We had one in December and one in February. We had pretty decent attendance, 18 and 12 people, so got a little bit more critical mass than we normally have in our weekly calls. And they were fairly successful in at least moving those issues forward. So we've made some decisions, updated the drafts, and we'll talk about those in the upcoming presentations. There's still a number of issues open against both of those drafts, so there's still some work to be done, but we're getting down to the short strokes now. So it's more minor issues to work out. Next. So the next steps for the versioning work, a lot of our work is happening now, a combination of on email, but a lot of discussions are in these weekly meetings. And we do have people occasionally join in for a few weeks or join in more permanently, which is great. We try to bring all the key issues back to the workgroup mailing list for decisions. And just show the time and date here. It's Tuesdays, 9 a.m. Eastern. I already mentioned that link before. And we're basically phasing the work because there's quite a bit to talk about. So right now our focus is on wrapping up the module versioning in Yang Semver. If we get those, pretty well wrapped up, we're going to move back onto the packages draft for the next few months, and that still has quite a bit of work. The last 2 drafts will follow after packages, so we can focus on packages. That's the version selection and schema comparison. And I think maybe there's one more slide. Yeah, the one kind of top level thing we're not sure about is we do have a number of these drafts, and actually, I forgot to mention, we even have two earlier drafts. There was a requirements draft that kind of led to all this work, and a solution overview draft, which presents the fact that we have 5 different drafts and how they fit together. But one of the big questions we have in our mind at the moment is for the main 2 drafts, the module versioning and Yang Semver. We're just debating a little bit when we actually bring those to last call. There's kind of 2 options, and one is we kind of drive to that now while all the issues are fresh in our minds. There were quite a few complex issues, and last call is likely to resurface some of them. You know, while we still remember all the reasons and details around them, the other option is to kind of try to progress those 2 documents and get them ready for last call, but not actually call last call until the other 3 drafts have progressed further. Because we have found a few times that as we go and continue work on packages and the other drafts, we realize, oh, we need to go back to the first 2 and make a few little tweaks. So, you know, it may not be a great idea to totally lock down the first 2 drafts and bring them through last call. So at the moment, our group is thinking that we will get the first 2 drafts ready, but we probably won't call a formal last call for those until we've had a chance to progress the other 3 drafts a bit more. But we may kind of say, hey, these are kind of ready. It's not official last call, but we think we're done with these docs as kind of a first level overview, so that hopefully that could force out a few issues or concerns ahead of last call. That's the kind of the way we're leaning, but I don't know if there's other opinions in the group on that. I see a bunch of hands, so am I supposed to manage the queue?
But I can go ahead. Yeah, sure. It'd be great if you manage the queue. That said, this is Lou. I'm going to jump in.
Sure.
The way you presented it's a little confusing of what the first 2 drafts are. I read the first 2 drafts as what you're saying is module versioning and Yang Semver. Verbally, you said we had 2 earlier drafts, so those could be.
Yeah, you're right. My apologies. I realized I introduced that confusion. In this presentation, and to be honest, in most of our work, we've been more or less ignoring the early requirements draft and solutions overview draft. To be honest, their time is mostly past, although we may clean them up and issue them at some point. So I'm referring to the module versioning and the Yang Semver drafts. And I've tried mostly in my presentation to kind of say that and put it in brackets, etc. But my apologies if I've caused confusion on that. I mean the module versioning and Yang Semver.
Yeah, I thought it would be good to clarify that. On the requirements and overview, I think once you all feel they are fully baked and ready to go, we can let them start the process. With respect to these first 2 solution documents, I think the last point you made while presenting the slide is sort of really important, which is we don't want to get too far on these and then and then figure out that we have to go, change something while we figure out the last bits, which is why we sort of taken the approach of let's try to progress them as a set. Now that said, if we are now working on the last little bit of the documents, you may say, all right, we know we're not going to have any changes, and then it's time. But you know, I don't think it would be good to get very far in this process on the versioning draft and the Semver draft, only to find that we have to bring them back to the working group to fix something.
Yeah. So okay, it sounds like you're leaning the same way as the weekly call group is at the moment. That we get them kind of ready, but we may not pull the trigger on them. Kent, I think you're next in the queue.
Yes, as a contributor, or actually maybe as chair, but we're having a similar issue in the NetConf working group with the client server suite of drafts, where there's a base level of drafts and then subsequently other drafts that depend on them. What we did is we moved the base level set drafts through working group last call, so we could get a formal sign off of sorts there. And then we're moving on to then doing a second tranche of drafts, and then lastly a third tranche of drafts with working group last calls. But the chairs plan to hold the drafts effectively in the chair queue, and not push the publish button to the AD, so that just for this reason that it may be the case that as we get down into the later drafts that changes will be necessary in the earlier drafts, and we don't want that to be thrashing the AD queue. So I think it's working well there, or the idea is working. It makes sense to do there, and I would suggest that we do that here as well.
Okay, why don't we take that under advisement, and we'll talk about it on the weekly call. So it sounds like, just to make sure I understand, another option is to trigger the last call, but to have any steps after that be held.
Yes, we could do the last call on the first two drafts here.
Yeah, and hold them there.
But just hold them within the working group.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'll take that back to our weekly call group, and we'll talk about those options. Tim.
Yeah, hey Jason. So I just wanted to make sure I got a clarification. Was that from the design team perspective, the thought was that all 5 of the drafts would enter working group last call at the same time? Because you had mentioned that until we got a little bit more work progressing on the 3 drafts, I didn't quite understand what the.
So not exactly. I think our thinking is that we probably wouldn't just put all 5 into working group last call at the same time. We'll probably still phase them a bit through last call, but it's more a question of how much further we wait on the last 3 to bring the first 2 solution drafts to last call. So yeah, I'm doubtful that we'll wait on all 5 for last call, but they may be not far apart. It depends how long we wait to progress the last 3 before we trigger the first 2.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions around this, the high-level intro? If not, that was it for me, and we can move on to Rashad.
I think Kent, excuse me, I think Kent makes a good point, is that what's really important is that we progress them to the ISG as a set so they can evaluate the total solution. As to by doing piecemeal, we run the risk of the ISG coming back and saying, yeah, but you've only solved part of the problem. So if it helps the working group to proceed do them in multiple steps and then hold them to submit for publication as a full set, that works.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. This is Rashad. I'm going to be presenting the update on the Yang module versioning draft on behalf of all the authors, contributors, whoever shows up on Tuesday mornings. Next slide, please. So as Jason was mentioning, we had a couple of virtual interims since last IETF. That's allowed us to make, I think, more progress than we usually do between 2 IETFs, well, in 1 IETF cycle. I'm going to summarize the issues which we've addressed since last IETF and during the virtual interims, and those have been reflected in revision 02. So number 1, and all those things have been, it's not just me, obviously, behalf of the authors, various people have contributed on those issues. So number 1 is the addition of backwards compatibility rules for config false and output data. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide in a bit more detail. Number 2, in one of the virtual interims, or maybe in both of them, we discussed, how do we put the revision label in file names, and we clarified the use of the of hash. Number 3, there were discussions also in the virtual interims on the impact of removing revisions from history. document has been updated with that. There's new text stating that changing import statement is backwards compatible. We went back and forth on that on the mailing list, etc. We also discussed the last virtual interim what characters should be allowed in the revision label. We've closed on that. The document has been updated. And last but not least, there's new text for IANA maintain Yang modules. Rob did send an email to the working group on this and got feedback from LADA, I believe, on this. Rob, is there anything you want to add on this specific topic right now, or you wait until the end? Okay, Rob.
I will just very quickly speak and just say that, as I said in the email, the plan is once we've got this IANA tech sort of, the working group's happy with it, to ask IANA to do an early review of this. I was speaking to Michelle yesterday, just explaining it, and I sent the email I sent to Netmod on to her. She's had to drop from this meeting. But the aim here is just to try and smooth any bumps early on with IANA, so it doesn't happen during the ISG review and then have to come back. So if anyone's got any comments on the IANA text, it'd be good to sort of share those early on so we can make sure that that's resolved and then get their feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, the backwards compatibility rules for config files. So the reason why we tackle this is because 7950 talks mostly or only about config true nodes. So for example, if you shrink the range of a leaf node, that's non-backwards compatible for config, but for config files, it's not the case. So those rules were written and presented by Balazs, I believe, at the last virtual interim. We still haven't got lots of feedback on them. It would be good for people to take a look at the latest rev of the document and give us feedback on the mailing list, please. So for example, I won't go through this exhaustively, but and it applies to output data also. So whatever you were getting as state or output data to an RPC, those rules apply to both. If you're adding a mandatory node or optional schema node, that's backwards compatible. That's fairly obvious. If you're making an optional node mandatory, that's also backwards compatible. We've had lots of discussions on number 3, I believe, where, what happens if you remove an optional schema node or mandatory node. We've decided to make those and to make that and BC. And, similarly, if you're changing a mandatory number 4, you're changing a mandatory node to optional, that's tagged as NBC because of the impact on the client. The client would have been expecting that node to be there in the response, whether it's in the operational data store or whether it's the output of the RPC. And then, there's 5.6 talk about, what's okay for, if you're expanding a range, it's fine. If you're for config false, which is not the case for config true. And anyway, next slide, please. And this is points which were presented last virtual interim and are in the latest rev of the document. It talks about client key behavior. For example, number 1, if a client is getting data which it's not expected because maybe the some attributes have been added or leaf nodes have been added, the client must just discard those and ignore those. Number 2, we're stating that if there's data that the client receives where maybe some is expected and some is not expected, well, the expected valid part should be handled, and even if it's discarding the part which is unexpected or it views as invalid because it's not in its own schema. Similar stuff for getting data which is outside of the value space. So again, for config, if you increase the range, that's backwards compatible. For For config false, the client might not be expecting that by default, so we're saying it should try to handle those things as gracefully as possible. And similarly for the last item, if there's, max elements or stuff like that, and it typically would be expecting a certain number of elements, if it receives more, please no assert. So that's it for the new rules for config false and output data. I'm going to repeat. Please take a look at them. We didn't get much feedback last interim and on the alias recently. If we don't get feedback on that, I guess when we go to working group last call, that's going to be the forcing function. But it'd be good to have those feedback before we get there. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, insignificant white space changes. The Tuesday crowd feels we've spent more time than we should on this, so hopefully we're going to be closing on this very soon. That is issue number 8 on GitHub. Went back and forth. We spoke about it, I believe, during the December interim. And the consensus, maybe it's rough consensus, but it's a consensus among the attendees, is if you look at the section 11 of 7950, it states that when you, and we're talking about published changes, if you publish a change to a module, it requires a new revision okay statement. There's no going, it can't be done any differently. I think the discussions we're having on the list and during the virtual interim is for non-published changes. What if I take a module and I prettify it and all that? We're not addressing any of that here. We're saying, even if you publish a new revision which only has insignificant white space changes, you need a new revision. I mean, we believe that specific scenario should be rare. That's why we think that we've been spending too much time on this specific topic. And also, the Yang-Semper draft has been modified by Joe. It gives this as an example of when the patch version is being changed. And the next step for this specific topic is to clarify it in the module versioning document. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is something we haven't discussed extensively on the Tuesday call. I don't think that's been brought to the list yet. So the issue basically is tracking, what's the impact of adding, changing, or removing an extension statement? Is it a role, is it BC, is it NBC? And the answer is we don't know. It depends on the extension statement. So where the Tuesday call is leaning right now is to say when an author is defining a new extension statement, the author should mention in the description of the extension statement, what's the impact? What if I add this? What if I change the parameter of this statement? What if I remove it? And that's the so that's the direction in which we're going right now. We'd like to hear feedback from the working group on this topic too. And discussion also went, well, are we changing anything regarding what's mentioned for extension statements in 7950? And the answer is no. If you see an extension statement and you don't understand it, the behavior is unchanged. Next slide, please. Yes, Kent?
This is Kent. It reminds me of a discussion that we had in the past about critical extension statements. We don't, I think it's a Yang next issue, but the ability to, when defining extension statements, to indicate if they're critical or not, that the client must be able to have awareness of their meaning. Of course, that's not, again, not what's here today. And so perhaps, as you discuss or said in the description statement, handling it this way is the best we can do for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think what you describe is needed, but we really want to keep it separate from what we're trying to achieve here. Yes, Rob.
Just on Kent's, I think Kent's got a good idea there. It may be that we should potentially consider defining extension statements to define the behavior of adding and removing extension statements. So actually to put that into the language rather than just a description of that behavior. Maybe that could be done as part of the comparison draft, or maybe that's part of Yang Next, but maybe it's worth raising an issue to track this and see if we should think about it. But not for this draft, but for one of the other future ones.
Yep, good point. Okay. When can we add NBC changes substatements? So this is issue 83. As section 3.2 of the document mentions, this extension is used to indicate Yang module changes that contain non-backwards compatible changes. It is a substatement of the revision statement. It's been added as part of this document. And, its document is very clear. If somebody's changing a Yang module and issues a new revision and knows that it's an NBC change, well, the author must add the extension, assuming that that module supports Yang module versioning. What we've been going back and forth on is whether adding that tag, that NBC changes extension, should be allowed if all changes are BC. So we've discussed this a few times during the Tuesday call, and there's no consensus yet. So, you see the two lines in bold there. The first one says, well, should we go, well, should not, you should not that extension. There's no real reason why you should do that, but using should gives you a little bit of leeway. Or the second line, which says, no, you must not do that. If you know that all the changes are BC according to the 7950 rules and the rules we are defining in this document, you should not do that. Yes, Kent.
Yeah, just point of order, within the IETF, shoulds, as well as should nots, are effectively musts when we're working on our own documents. I mean, you have to have a really good reason to violate the should or should not when publishing an IETF document.
Yeah, but it's still not a, I mean, it's must for the general key public, but I mean, you're right. You have to have a really good reason. What's a good reason for somebody might not be a good reason for, I mean, for me, it just opens the door very slightly. Whereas must not, if you don't abide, you're really, I mean, I see what you're saying, but there's still this small difference between the two. Yes, Italo?
I think there is actually no difference because you cannot check that I'm certain or not that the change is BC. So de facto, the second statement is a should not, because you cannot validate the second part, the if statement in the must not in reality.
Well, in theory, the rules would be super clear that it becomes very obvious. I could envision something where, it's a very simple change. You are certain that it's backwards compatible. On the other hand, if you're changing a regex pattern and you're not sure whether you now have a smaller range or bigger range or the same range, but it's, you might not be certain. But there should not, I won't pretend to be a lawyer on this. I mean, in our Tuesday call, we've been seeing a subtlety or a slight difference between the should not and the must not. If that's not the case, we need to realign. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, Jason Stern. I think, one of the cases, for example, we were thinking was that there may be some changes, for example, to the value space of a state leaf. And by the rules we've defined, strictly it's backwards compatible. But we want to leave at least a possibility open for the author to decide, well, this is a important enough change, functional change, that we really want to flag it to the users of the module. So we didn't want to close that door. And there's also some concerns that we may not be able to identify all cases like that now. So we at least some of us are inclined to, even though it may be a very strong statement, should not, we didn't want to completely close the door with a must not.
Yes, that was a good. Yes, Kent?
Yes, as chair, I'm wondering, how can we close this item? Would you be looking for a hum or just people to respond to the list, or?
I mean, we can do a hum but I mean, whether we do a hum or not, I'd like to see stuff on the list. I mean, the hum, I just don't know. This is a new issue we're bringing up. I just don't know how people are in tune with that issue. But if you feel like doing a hum, that's good with me, but definitely getting feedback on the list would be good.
I see my co-chair and AD in the line, so I'll defer to responding to that. But just quickly, my own comment is I think the should not is okay.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think this issue is too subtle to just introduce it and then ask for a hum. I think it needs people to be involved in a discussion, minimum on the list, but better in person on the weekly calls. So I think if people are interested in this or have an opinion, it would be awesome if we could, I mean, certainly the opinions now in this meeting would be good, but also to maybe give some of their thoughts one way or the other on the list or join the weekly call, because it's kind of complicated.
I agree. Lou?
So I suspect a should is fine. I don't think I get all the subtleties, so I can't categorically say that. When to help move this forward, I think putting into the document why you might not follow the should. Put maybe not guidance, but some consideration. And I think by going through that process, it may help crystallize whether this is a should or a must, or should not or must not.
Thank you. Rob?
I think my comments actually going to almost mirror what Lou was saying. Is I think we need to have a bit more text here to explain the reasons why. So I don't think it's just that these sentences will necessarily stand on their own. It maybe need a bit more background information here, and hence it's probably worth getting feedback from the working group on the list once we've got that paragraph and it's seen in context. I've got no objections to doing a hum now. I'm not sure it's that meaningful. Or show of hands.
Yes, chair.
Ken?
Let's just let's not do the hum. Let's move forward. Thank you.
Okay. And just looking at the pros and cons, the pro is what Jason was mentioning earlier. If it's a case where you know it's config false, but you want to tag the change for whatever reason, you're worried about your clients might trip on that change. The con, well, fairly obvious. If we start overusing this, we've used the term diluting the meaning of the NBC change. Typically, when a consumer would see an NBC change tag, they would look at that and try to figure out what change, what the impact to them might be, and that would be false alarm. This is it on this slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's something which has come up very recently. I'm not sure I've got the right issue number, but somebody who's in tune in Semver contacted us and basically said, well, NBC in Semver means non-breaking change, which is the opposite of non-backwards compatible, which is our meaning. Well, the meaning in this document. So quick discussion about this. We've decided to rename the extension to non-backwards compatible. It's a bit longer than NBC, but it'd be used once per revision. So we don't think it's too much noise. Yes, Rob?
Just going to add to that, that I think, I can't remember who looked at this, Jason or Joe, but in that Semver terminology, I don't think it was that non-breaking change was a particularly strong usage. I think it might have been used once or twice. So it wasn't as if this was prevalent in that document to enough to force us to change all of our terminology. So we were quite happy to carry on using MBC and non-backwards compatible, but we just thought in terms of the module, it made sense to be explicit and clear.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Well, yeah, there's, as Jason mentioned, there's less major issues now. Well, and we're hoping to resolve the last known outstanding issues very soon. And this is it. Thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm Joe Clark. I'll be presenting on behalf of the authors group that previously mentioned meets every Tuesday on Yang semantic versioning. So next slide, please. Our current status, we added text. So this was also presented at that interim that Jason mentioned, and we added text to address version gaps. And by gaps, I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean there in the upcoming slide, so stay tuned. We also addressed the famous GitHub issue number 45 by adding text that IETF modules must have a Yang semantic version revision label. Again, I've got a slide on this, so hold your praise until then. And we added some, Rob specifically came up with some text to add guidance around IANA maintained modules, and I've got a slide on that as well. So it was mentioned previously that I made some of these changes. I am editor on this, so the changes go on behalf of what the authors talk about, what we get back from the list as well. I just happen to hold the editor pin on the Yang Semver draft. Next slide, please. All right, so version gaps. The idea here is that someone could, a module author, as an example for a module, could have a lineage with revision labels that look something like 1.0, 1.1, 1.3. That's fine. They, for whatever reason, maybe 1.2 was an internal release. 1.2 they just felt was a mess and they never released it. But this could be the lineage. And so you ask yourself, so how would an import of revision or derive based on 1.2 work? Because there is no instance of that 1.2 tied to any one of the revisions in the history, in the provenance or lineage of the module. The same question could also be asked about revision date, because today we have, you can import by a specific revision date. What happens if that date doesn't exist? So what we decided was that we would allow for version gaps, that a module author or artifact author could in fact create something like 1.0, 1.1, 1.3, and we documented the risk to import by doing so. Because essentially, if you try to import 1.2 in this case, it will fail. There will not be a history entry that matches 1.2. Just like if you tried to import from a non-existent revision date and you couldn't resolve that, you couldn't find a module with that that had that specific revision date, that import would fail. So we clarified that in the document. And then we want to, and Rob has presented some text that's currently merged in GitHub, but it came after the cutoff window to address this issue number 78, that a little to what Rashad was saying about would we add the NBC change modifier for a module revision we know didn't have backwards or non-backwards compatible changes. So the same thing could apply in SimVer. Would we allow for bumping the SimVer major version component when there were only backwards compatible changes? So we took the version gap text, Rob massaged some of that as well, and we merged in a kind of a clarifying set of text around how one goes about increasing or bumping or changing the semantic version components based on various things, tying that back into text that indicates if there are any impact or things to be aware of by a artifact author, specifically around, or in one case, around this version gap. So that's something that you'll see. The version gap text you'll see now if you read the current revision of the module of the draft that's out there. And after 110, we will commit and submit a new revision of the draft that includes this text that resolves issue 78 and adds more of that clarity. Next slide, please. All right, I was kind of hoping somehow magically this slide would get skipped, but this is issue number 45. So we've mentioned this issue before. We brought it up here in various meetings and talked about it. We've gotten some feedback on the list, but we went ahead as a set of authors and kind of made an assertion here, maybe to drive a forcing function. And issue 45 reads, should all newly published IETF Yang modules include a Yang SimVer revision label? Ultimately, we decided the answer would be yes. Reason being, it helps the reader, the human, at a glance know if two revisions of a module are backwards compatible. So I'm not going to read the text there. That's the paragraph. The reason the ED is in brackets there, I noticed a typo in what I submitted, so the ED was left off. It's now in the version we have in GitHub. But essentially what we're saying is that yes, all of these IETF maintained modules, when a new revision of that module comes out, we want to use in the IETF the Yang SimVer revision label. So there would be a revision label as part of that new revision. And there's text there addressing what would happen. And this mirrors the IANA guidance that you'll see in a slide. This mirrors that guidance that we would retroactively, not just now, but the next time, or if a next time a module revision is published, we would retroactively place SimVer revision labels on previous revisions according to the rules that we've already spelled out in our various documents. I figured there'd be a question. Kent?
Not a question, but a comment. On the tooling side of things, it would be helpful for validation tools like YangLent or PYang to flag when it's not there. And so that way it proactively encourages module writers to ensure it's there when it's needed.
Absolutely. We as you know, we've got I think 5th draft in our set of solution drafts is around tooling. It's been one that we haven't visited in a while, but yes, we're going to need guidance to Yang doctors. We're going to need some of that data tracker tooling in place to help notice this and kind of help authors arrive at the right value, and certainly flag where, if this is ratified, flag where we're missing required data. Italo.
Thank you. Just a question for clarification. When you say publish IETF modules, you mean only RFCs or also internet drafts and working group or individual?
Understood. So with this particular text here, we're talking about making sure that the published revision, the published modules have the revision. There is other text already in this draft that talk about that addresses the IETF development process with respect to Yang semantic version and what would happen there, and how you would tie what revision label values, what Yang semantic version label values you would use during a development, and that includes individual drafts. So like it includes individual first-time drafts. It includes individual proposals towards a BIS draft. So there's examples of doing that. The idea being that, yes, as part of module development, we would want anything that is going to be like, hey, I just added a revision like -02 of this draft with a new revision of the Yang module, that there would be some semantic version revision label on that new revision of the anytime you're putting in, essentially anytime you're putting a new revision into your module, be it development or ratification, that there would be a unique revision label that is a Yang semantic version. Rashad, I see you in queue.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but at some point we discussed about issuing new guidelines to Yang doctors to check that those things have been done correctly.
Yes, I mentioned that we're going to need to do that as well as make sure the tooling is in place to support this, like we have the Yang lints, the PyYang auditors that run on any new submissions, any new draft submissions that have Yang modules.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I missed that.
No problem. I don't see anyone else in queue. You'll have a few more minutes to beat up on me because I have this slide. So this is guidelines for IANA maintained modules. And as I mentioned, Rob proposed some text here that we batted around for a little while. And if you look at the new section 9.2 in the Yang semantic version draft, you'll see a lot of text there. I didn't want to paste it in here. It's more than just one paragraph. I think there was some recent comments on the list about this, but I don't recall I don't have the details right in front of me. So if someone wants to comment, please do come to the mic. But the highlights of these changes: IANA maintained modules must also include a Yang SimVer revision label. Now, obviously, we don't want them going back and just making that change. So the idea is that revision labels would be retroactively applied when the next revision of a module is published. So next revision comes out, a semantic version would be added to, semantic version revision label would be added to that new revision, and then using those same 3.3 rules would be retroactively backed up to the 1.0.0. Just like with IETF modules, IANA modules would not be expected, or we wouldn't expect them to use those _compatible or _non-compatible modifiers. We don't necessarily expect a lot of necessarily major version changes either, given that for the most part it is said that we've heard a lot of times said in the IETF that things would maintain backwards compatibility. But obviously, semantic version and what we talked about in our version solution allows for that. But these extra modifiers would be even more so. We would not expect them to show up in these IANA or even IETF maintained modules. And I think I have one more slide on the guidance of Jason. We put this in, next steps. I can't believe I initially forgot it. So it was already mentioned that, I think Rashad, you mentioned that gentleman Joseph jumped in and gave us a lot of good feedback on GitHub issue 78. He's got some background on the SimVer spec. And ironically, SimVer 2.0.0 has changed over the years. So you may have seen in the recent minutes, Rob assigned me an AI to go back 5 years and see what that text looked like. So I went into the Wayback Machine and found that SimVer 2.0.0, that page from 2 years ago, reads slightly different than that page today. And in particular, there have been some normative changes. Some things have been bumped from a should to a must. Some lowercase shoulds and musts have been made uppercase. So that the spec is actually evolving. And the good news is, besides some of those normative changes that didn't directly affect some of the things we did, it hasn't really impacted the work that we've done thus far and what we've incorporated. Now, Joseph left a ton of other comments in that GitHub, and I have another AI to more thoroughly audit those. Rob has done some of that and marked things where he doesn't think they apply to what we're doing here in the IETF with Yang semantic versioning, but we need to make sure that we've addressed his comments. But to address this drift in the in the Semver 2.0.0 spec, what we're going to do is change the xref that we have in our document right now to point to the static GitHub version of the text, the one that is there today that we've been reading most recently, and then add text to the document to explain why we're going to that particular revision, that GitHub revision of the spec when we reference Semver versus going to the semver.org site like we're doing today. We felt this was better than copying verbatim the spec into like an appendix of our document. I guess all XREFs kind of have this would have kind of this issue if it's an external reference. We felt this was safe enough, and this is again the text that we've kind of been going off of, the more modern Semver text. I think that is my last slide. So those are our next steps to kind of shore this document up. But those are where we've arrived now in terms of the issues, and those should be, I believe, the only other open GitHub issues around Yang semantic versioning. So with that, I'll open for any final questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to present. All right, thank you, chairs.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tim. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, good morning, everyone. My name is Qing. I'm here to present a self-describing data object tag. Next. Oh, can you go back? Yeah, document status. So this draft has just been adopted in the end of last year, and two code adoption has been initiated. The second one ended in December 21 last year. So many thanks to the Yugen and many other contributors and provide good input and useful comments and help to improve this document. So since last IETF meeting, change compare with the previous version, actually we add update to the RFC 8407 in the front page, and to align with the module tag RFC. The second one, actually we try merge the self-describing data object use cases into the introduction section as a subsection, and just do a little bit restructure. So the third is we clarify the relationship between the data object and object tag, property tag, and metric tag in the use cases section. And also we add one glossary section to define what is OPM. And in addition, actually for context information tag such as the multi-source tag, metric group tag, we clarify the appropriate scope. Next. So two open issues we want to discuss here. The first issue was brought up by the rule during the code option. Actually, because as we know, actually module tag RFC has already get published, and it introduced a guideline to model writer for standard module level tag definition. So this requires updating to the RFC 8407. So similar to the module tag RFC, this draft introduces the guideline for module writer for standard data object tag definition. So this also requires updating to the RFC 8407. So we make the change. So this has already been reflected in the current version. Next. So second issue is about the data node tag identification. So here's a model structure we propose. You can see for each data object, they can have multiple tags. So for data node tags, we can have OPM tag, we can have context information tag. For OPM tag, it can be further break down into the object tag, property tag, and metric tag. And context information tag, we actually define two type of tag. One is multi-source tag, and the other is metric group tag. Actually, this only apply to the metric related data object, so they can provide a second level tag. And so the issue here is when we actually have multiple data node tag associated with one data object, is the object name sufficient enough to identify these tags? So based on our analysis, actually for each object, data object can only have one single data object, and also they can have one single property tag and one single metric tag. And so this property tag or metric tag cannot coexist for the same data object. So it's okay to use object name to identify this tag. Secondly, for the context information tag, we have multi-source tag. Actually, they can provide to indicate whether metric are from the single source or from the multiple source. So we define aggregated value and no aggregated value. So this also cannot exist at the same time. For metric classification type, such as we can classify the metric into the delay related tag or bandwidth related tag. So these also are excluded from each other. So we are not coexist. So based on this analysis, we think so the current model structure, the object name can sufficient enough to identify these tags. Next. So we also have been aware there's a draft, interesting draft called Open Metric. Draft has been discussed in the OPSWG, and it actually defines the open metric for both pull and push-based data connection. And they propose 8 metric types. It has already open source related to the open telemetry. And we think this is related to what we propose in this draft. We will investigate how to align with this open metric work. So we also like solicit any feedback and comments for this draft, and we'll try to address this. Thank you. Tim?
So I was wondering about the open metric work. What was your thoughts on what you're talking about with respect to integrating both of those?
Yeah, for our data node tag, actually we call telemetry tag. We investigated this before. We try to provide the operation or management data classification. So this is also we can sort out all the metric related object, and also we can provide fine granularity metric classification. And we in the current draft we provide like a context information tag such as metric group. We can classify the metric further into the, for example, bandwidth or packet loss and jitter. And so this here, the metric type actually provide more fine granularity for metric classification. So that's something we may need to look into, see whether we can reference or because we actually did raise this issue on the list actually when we in the first convolution and define some like unit. But this is something it was suggested to define this kind of more fine granularity unit in a specific service related models. So but now actually we think maybe it's useful to revisit these this related work open metrics to see whether we can get the clear definition and to align with this work. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but I still didn't quite understand what you would propose within this draft itself. Are you suggesting that there will be new standards defined tags that would be object-based tags that you would get based upon metrics, the information that came from the metrics? For example, would there be an anticipation that there'd be a nodal tag called gauge? That's what I didn't quite understand.
Yeah. Actually, in the previous page, actually, we listed the context information tag. This actually provide a second level tag for metric-related data object. So this here, the 8 metric type defined in the open metric draft actually provide maybe another example. We may say this see as a second level metric related tag, maybe can also be seen as a context information related tag. So this maybe still the open issue. We can discuss this maybe to the list. I haven't thought about how to align with this, but I think this draft maybe worth to look into. Yeah.
Hi, Chen. Next in queue. First, I just want to apologize for jumping to your last slide there at the beginning. I hit the wrong keyword shortcut. But
No
my comment is, I was wondering, what is the when last time I looked at this, it seemed that the concept of being able to specify node tags in a general sense, and then there's the specifics of kinds of node tags, like and in that second category, I placed metrics. But somehow I had the sense that when I was reading before, that the metrics were actually what I think to be like intermingled with the first category, like the generic approach, a strategy. Is it the case, or is it? Was I misreading? Did we lose Chen? Chen, you are no longer having microphone. Okay.
Yeah, I get you.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so please continue.
Did you hear my question or comment?
Yeah, I missed the second half, maybe.
Okay, so I was saying the draft brings forward what I consider to be 2 categories of proposal. There's the generic approach of having tags per nodes, and then there's kinds of tags for nodes, where I think metrics is a kind of tag. But I think I was seeing in the draft that the metrics were actually part of the first category, like in a generic sense of any. Is it the case that the base definition is including the metrics, or are they isolated into a separate definition?
Yeah, for metric tag, actually, we don't define any new metric. Actually, we just tag metric related data object. Actually, it belong to the first category. For second category, actually, we see this. For example, you identify a bunch of metric related data object. You can use a second category tag we call the context information tag to further break down the metric related to classify this metric related data object.
Okay, I think I'll be spending more time looking at these drafts coming forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Yes, I was just looking at the draft now, and one of the questions I have or observations I have relates to, and this is a contributor, relates to the use of the sort of standard tags and updating the guidelines to model writers. I have 2 sort of observations or concerns. One is that some of the tags like IETF object sort of feels very much similar to what a list element is in Yang, and an IETF property seems quite similar to a leaf element in Yang anyway. So I'm not quite sure what extra information they convey, is my first comment. And then the other comment is that I think if we were to add these tags throughout Yang models, they might add quite a lot of sort of feels like noise to the Yang models, making them harder to read. I think the metric one is potentially a bit different, and that might be more useful to have to label the things you might want to read in terms of what things are changing. But the object and property ones, I think it'd be worth looking at whether that information can be inferred from the Yang model automatically or not. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that good question actually. For object, actually, we data object, we actually already clarify in the draft to see how this data object relate to the container leaf list, and this this is just serve that like a root node. Actually, we tag the actually all the data node can be tagged with the object tag. Yeah, you're right, actually. So more meaningful is a metric tag, and property is a little bit different from the magic tag. Actually, we can see how to address your issue. Yeah, maybe take out offline for this.
Yes, it's just thinking about if we put these in, are we going to end up with a lot of noise in the models? And is it definitely the case that every operator is going to have the same views of what metrics they care about and what things are properties? So the stuff where they're doing it dynamically maybe makes more sense. I'm just questioning writing that statically into the Yang model, whether that's going to be helpful.
Okay. We'll see how to address this next row. Thanks. Okay, this is Qingwu again. I'm here on behalf of all the authors. I'm here to present the Yang data model for EC policy management. The name we list here are author and a contributor for this work. Next. So recapture a little bit for EC actually. EC actually enabling event-based management, and it provide useful method to monitor state change of the manager object. And we use Yang to express the EC policy, and so it can enable several management behavior. And in this draft, we actually define 4 types of events. For example, server event and a data store event. Actually, they can tie to the event stream subscription and data store content subscription. And then we also define timer event and diagnosis event. Timer event provide you a cron job task.
I think we just lost Qingwu's microphone again.
I think he's coming back.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, my connection is not stable actually. So actually for EC, they can be realized in 2 ways. Actually, we more focus on the second way. The first is centralized network management. We see there's a lot of limitation. For example, they have slow response to network change. They have huge resource consumption. So we may need to consider distributed way for device server management. We dedicate network control to the server. So this actually, in some cases, may require the state management, and also require some computation logic to perform algorithm or logic computation. Next. Next page.
Just a second, I'm fumbling with the keyboard here. That should be it. Oh,
Not
I did the wrong button again. Here we go.
okay. Status update since the last IETF meeting. This draft was just adopted in the beginning of this year, and we also have two working adoption, and there's a lot of discussion for this draft. so we thank for all the contributor and commentator for the comments, especially for Andy. Actually, in during the offline discussion, he provided a foundation for this document. Actually, also help us to provide guidance for direction of this document. And in the second working adoption, actually, we have a bunch of issues was raised, and we have 5 issues. The first is policy-based management definition. This raised by the Tom Peck, and the other 4 issues actually raised by the Eugen, and we try to address this issue. Yeah. Next. Yeah. First issue is what is the relationship with the R2SF young capability data model, and this issue was raised by the Tom Peck, and we do some investigation. We think in R2SF actually 2 related work. One is capability data model, and actually this adopt EC paradigm that is defined in R2SF framework, which has already been published as RFC 8329, and we think for EC defined in this R2SF framework is not generic enough actually, and is more related to the data package and data flow treatment. For example, for the action, they actually define as a operation that can be performed on the packet or flow. So for EC policy young data model, we actually adopt a similar EC paradigm, or we call the imperative paradigm. And so the event actually more related to the data store subscription and event stream subscription. Condition is very similar, but for action more generic. So based this actually we think network security function actually is an example use case for EC model policy draft. So we actually send an email to the R2SF mailing list and get a confirmation from the author, so they agree with this conclusion. Next. So second issue is about abstraction level to express policy and intent, and this brought up by the Eugen, and we think we should separate policy expression from the intent representation. So the intent representation actually they in many different contexts may mean different things. So for example, in NMRG, they gave the intent definition. They discuss how to do the intent translation or intent mapping. So this intent representation is not a scope of this document. For policy expression in this draft, we think policy need to be readable and expressed at a high level abstraction with suitable language. So we think Yang actually is this kind of suitable language can be expressed by the NMS and the controller. So we can see the similar example like a Riemann and SMP. Riemann actually is extension of SMP. They can provide traffic flow data for troubleshooting, so you can adjust for better performance. So similarly for EC, we actually can provide the EC policy data for also for troubleshooting or self-management, self-monitoring, and we can manipulate this EC and for the better performance. And also, second argument, we think unlike traditional policy management, we think this ESA policy expression need to combine down to the primitive representation that are more close to the execution abstraction. So one example of this primitive representation is Python and TCL and such kind of script language. And but there's a pitfall to do this compilation. And one of the example is Super. Actually, they compile. They actually define policy in UML, and UML model actually is a very complicated, cannot model use Yang. So we're not we are trying to avoid this kind of pitfall. So we think a Yang Yang expression is capable for this compilation, and Yang both representable and implementable. And next. For issue 3, actually, where policy executed, actually, we can reference the policy-based management framework that be specified by the IETF and DMTF. The two key components is PDP and PEP, which is policy decision point and policy enforcement point. For the centralized policy management, actually, we will implement a PDP in the management system. We'll implement the PEP in the Netmod device. So in these cases, we can see the policy is executed in the device. When we delegate some management function to the device, we actually can have a local PDP or local policy decision point in the Netmod device, and it can communicate with PEP in the Netmod device. So in these cases, we also can see actually policy is executed in the device or in the server. So, but the policy management framework is not in the scope of this draft. Actually, we more focus on the ESA policy executed by the netconf or resconf server. Next. So the fourth issue is when to detect or resolve the policy conflict. So for the ESA logic, we can see the first the ESA model policy will be injected into the network device or server, and then we'll extract the policy variable from the event, and we can map the policy variable into the XPath variable. And then we can evaluate this ESA XPath expression. If we can be evaluated successful, we will execute this ESA action. So in this process, we can detect policy conflict in either in ESA XPath expression evaluation or in the ESA action execution. And in addition, actually, for policy conflict, actually, we can detect it in the policy design or definition stage. And we can make sure that the new policy we define have no overlap with the existing policy. So this can help to resolve the policy conflict. So also in this draft, we define a diagnostic event, which can help to debug the policy conflict before the policy can be enforced in the network device. So we already consider how to resolve this policy conflict if there's any conflict within the policy. Next. So next issue is about the implementation experience and interest. We think ESA do have its own business model. Actually, the idea is we can have embedded pre-processing capability in the device and provide telemetry automation. So who will use this ESA? Who will be consumer of this ESA solution? We think the ESA solution need to be implemented by the both net management system and a device, and we can build various different applications. For example, server management application, service assurance application. And so we also have been aware actually there's existing implementation can provide good basis, such as embedded event management actually developed by the Cisco iOS, and also we for Huawei actually we also have a similar feature like open programmability system, and for Amazon actually they also have SNS actually they provide a similar feature. They can serve a good basis. So our plan actually we are working on this ECA model, and we also want if any vendor are interested, welcome to join us. And we also investigate some open source project like TerraFlow, and try to figure out how to make it open sourced. So any comments on all of these issues? Maybe I finish. Go to the next page. So follow up, actually, we will address the remaining comments during the call, especially these 5 issues. Actually, for the first issue, we already addressed this actually agreement. For other 4 issues, I think for the second issue about abstraction never to express policy and intent, actually, we still we received some feedback from the Yugen and some other, and they have some double on this, but we think we can debate or discuss this, and but we try to address all the open issue, and also we think maybe we can set up the GitHub for this Java, since it has all been adopted as working with Java. We can better keep track of this issue and make it more visible to the list. Last, we will consider to add the implementation status section to provide a more example for the ECA usage, and also we welcome more example from other contributors. That's all. Tim?
I do have just one question on the policy versus the intent expression, because I didn't understand exactly what you were saying. Are you suggesting that that the ECA model would be able to express an intent?
No, I want to separate the issue.
Okay. So again, I'm trying to understand. So are you going to? So the ECA model would not express an intent. Is that correct?
I try to separate. Yeah, you are right. Actually, for intent, actually, we can see this actually more like a descriptive or declarative semantics. Actually, for ECA, actually more focused on imperative semantics, and intent mode tell you for example, what the service is, but for ECA tell you how to realize this service. So we try to separate these 2 different paradigms. And we already see the intent has already been widely used, but I think a little bit overused or misused. So try to avoid this kind of confusion.
So just to be clear, so if I understand it correctly, in this draft, a policy may be part of a realization of an intent, but it isn't meant to be. But the policy is just that; it's just a realization of that may be associated with an intent, but it's not meant to express the intent itself. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks. That's what I need to know.
Thank you. Robert?
Jen, I was just going to ask about, I was looking at the draft, and which I've now lost. It has a mention about a function call in the draft, and it looks like they've been taken out and then put back in. And looking at the text, it just says there's a few built-in types like add, subtract, etc. But I couldn't see those references in the draft, so I didn't know whether more text is needed to explain that. But it was unclear to me exactly how that sort of function call works. So it might need some more text there.
Yeah, you raised a very good question. This is, we did discuss with Andy Berman about this. The idea is we really want to, decompose or compile the ECA policy into the primitive representation, which could be the Python actually. So we can provide a standard function call or library. So for the function call, we need to, more. Yeah, you are right. We need more text or description to provide more clear definition for what this function call is doing. And so this is the open issue we need to address in the later version.
Am I right in understanding that you could either use an XPath expression here, or you can use things like this function called? I'm just wondering whether it would be simpler in the draft if there's one way of specifying these, but perhaps your experience is saying that it's better to have multiple choices. And if so, it might be worth having those under feature keywords, so not all implementations necessarily have to support those.
Yeah. Yeah, we will figure out how to address this.
Okay, thank you.
I think Xuefeng also online. Maybe he can clarify. Xuefeng. So Xuefeng, we cannot hear you.
Robert's question
Okay.
is reasonable, so we need to further discuss this. Probably we need to figure out, do we need to have this function or not, or how do we implement it? So that's a further discussion.
Okay. So with that, I'm done. Any further comments?
Hi, Chen. Just quickly, I see that there's 2 slides left in this presentation, at least in the slide deck. Did you want to show them?
Pardon?
Well, it says that we're on page 9 of 11.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I think that's just the backup slides to
Okay.
help other people to understand the context. Doesn't need to be shared. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Go ahead, Scott.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the time that you've given me. I'm aware of what time it is, and this is the last session. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible. But this is just to provide a little background for those that haven't been involved in this. The IETF and the IEEE hold coordination meetings periodically. And one of the things that has come up, and it's come up for the last couple of years, every now and then this problem crops up and we talk about it for a while. And it's this particular issue is about the definition of MAC address as it's found in both the IETF and the IEEE. So what this presentation is just a summary of what the issue is, and I'm looking for help in it's coming up with some suggestions on the path forward, so we can write something down somewhere. I don't really care where, as long as we can write it down so that we don't have to talk about it anymore, I guess is the bottom line. So if you go to the next slide, there are a lot of words on these slides. I won't read every word, so I'll just give you the highlights because I figure people can read the slides offline and contact us and talk offline. The MAC address format, if you look in, this is just a slide that introduces that the formats are different. So if you go to the next slide, I have the actual information about what's different. I copied in what's from, it's kind of hard to read, but I copied in the definitions from both documents. One is in the IETF. It's on the right. If you look at the MAC address, it uses colon as a separator. It accepts upper and lowercase. The pattern allows upper and lower, but it says lowercase is canonical. And if you look at the IEEE definition, and I provided the links to the files, says that it uses dash as the separator, and it allows upper and lower, but it says uppercase is to be used. So you can kind of see the problem that we have there. So why is this a problem? Go to the next slide, please. The problem is that the MAC addresses are treated as strings, and there are places in certain Yang models where MAC addresses are to be compared, and there are also places where MAC addresses are being used as a key. So the concern is that if you've got both data types in your module, or even if you have use one of the data types, if you only use the IEEE or the IETF for MAC addresses, if you try to compare two MAC addresses, you have to make sure that they're exactly the same, including separators and upper and lower case. So if you go to the next slide, I think that's what this slide provides some examples of what the problems are. Let's skip the slide, that's okay. So that's okay. This is just a list of some places where there are some issues where a MAC address is used as either a key or used for quote matching. So it matters about how you enter in the value and how it's stored and how you bring it back. So if you go to the next slide, this is why SNMP is different. Well, we did an analysis, or I didn't do it. Somebody else did an analysis of SNMP, and SNMP stores the MAC address differently. It stores it specifically as an octet string with a display hint. Display hint is something that I really liked in SNMP, and I wish Yang had it, but it doesn't. So the way that it's stored is different than the way it's displayed. So there hasn't been historically an issue with SNMP in dealing with having MAC addresses not compare when you're dealing with what's on the wire. So if you go to the next line. Next slide, please. So what to do? I mean, it's this has been a problem for years, and so common wisdom says we really can't just go in and change the definition in IEEE or IETF in any substantial way. It would be an excellent example to try to leverage and exercise the semantic version and non-backward compatible changes, but you know, it's getting late and I'm getting punchy, so we won't go there right now. So so what I've done is just in this, like I say, to put this in perspective, this is really a I'm looking for suggestions. I'm looking for people to provide input on this. I'm not wedded to any of these things. So I provide a suggestion on the next slide, but then I think there's only one more slide after that. So if you go to the next slide, what I suggested doing, here is, and I had an updated version of this that unfortunately didn't get loaded. There is one other issue about it, is that we only deal with the 6 octet, but there's also an 8 octet MAC address. So we might need to provide a union here for the type def to support both formats, but that's a nit. Anyway, the thing that I'm suggesting is that we leave the IETF and the IEEE definitions alone, and we create a new data type that's called, again, the name can be changed, whatever, something called MAC address normalized, or some other more descriptive name, where what we've done is we've taken out the ambiguity in the pattern. So in this pattern, there is no ambiguity of upper and lower case, and there's no ambiguity with separators because I took them out. And then we could make some words or something about how if you want to enter a MAC address, you can use this as the way to enter it, and then you can do whatever you want, and then you won't have any issues with string comparisons or with keys or whatever. So this was just one suggestion because I like playing around with Yang, so I typed something up. So if you go to the next slide, this is the final slide. And really, so we have three things that we can do. One, we can do nothing. We can just continue on the merry way that we have. Another thing we can do is talk about creating this normalized MAC address, and if people in the IETF would even look at it and use it, there are a few places where MAC addresses are used in IETF documents and the Yang modules. The other thoughts are, would this be something that people would be interested in to provide a display hint-like capability in Yang, or even provide something that would allow us to have a string equivalence pattern, so that associated with a string, you not only have the pattern, but you also would have a separate thing that would allow the back end code to say, well, this is the pattern and this is what I have to match, but if this is another string that allows me to say, if I see things that are within this range, they're going to match, something like that. And I'm open for any other thoughts that you have. I mean, this is something that we talk a lot about in the IEEE, where the IEEE has been using Yang now since about 2017. We have a group that meets weekly that talks about guidelines and things. So we get really good support from the Yang doctors and from Rob and others that help us learn how to use this. So we're just looking for ways to effectively use Yang properly and make sure that the IEEE modules work and play well with the modules that come from the IETF. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for your time and attention, and look forward to emails, or we can mailing list, or if anyone has any thoughts about this now. Thank you. Oh, sorry, the presenter is running the queue. So Jan, I'll turn my mic back on.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting. I mean, it's in one way, these are just small details, but in practice, they are even small hurdles can turn over a cart, right? So even if you are taking MAC address as example, the same thing happens in a lot of different places. So inventing
right, exactly, yeah.
So inventing things like some module : case insensitive or some other direct like that, that's directing the service on how to compare this. I think that would be interesting. Happy to work with you on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's I'm looking for something like that, because there are many things that Yang does very well, and there are a couple of things that SNMP SMI had from a language perspective that I feel are missing. That and that's one of the reasons I'm asking, right? Because if somebody said, oh well, yeah, in Yang you do this and you get that exact same functionality, but but there seems to be some things that that I would like to see added. So yeah, I'll take that. So Rob?
Yes, I just wanted to add that this is an issue that's being tracked, as Scott, as you already know, this is the working group. This is an issue that's being tracked in the IEEE IETF liaison meetings to try and find a resolution to this. So I would welcome input and thoughts from the working group. I'm not sure there's any easy answers here, and the sort of downsides to various choices. So coming up with a good technical solution would be good. At a minimum, I think it would be useful, at least in the description statements of the types, to potentially flag this up as a warning, to sort of try and do normalization internally. But as Jan said, if this is turning up in other places, that may be enough justification to try and look for a wider technical solution that sort of solves this problem more generally, or at least investigate if there is something on that path that is feasible.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I kind of flew through the slides. There was, in one of the previous slides, it did talk about that this is something that happens in other places, like when you're dealing with OUIs, as as strings and things. So there are other examples. This just happens to be the one that was top of mind for the IETF, IEEE liaison at this recently. So Tim?
Ask a question because I was kind of, it was interesting. I'd not seen that this was an issue before because in all honesty, everything that I've seen is that the pattern uses the the colon, right? I had not seen the dash as a pattern that's in wide use in any of the Yang modules,
Right.
whether it's config or the BBF or wherever, right? So I was kind of shocked. So my question is that is this a problem that that the industry really needs to resolve, or is this a problem that the IEEE needs to figure out how to come into alignment with the rest of the world?
Well, that's you raise a very interesting point, but you have to look at it from the IEEE's perspective in this case, because the IEEE defines MAC address. So I can certainly go back and tell the IEEE that they've defined their version of MAC address incorrectly, but you can imagine that message doesn't come across very well because
well, I'm not
they
sure
right.
I would say it was
But,
defined incorrectly. I would just say that the rest of the world,
no,
right,
no,
that is actually using this stuff is not.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me finish. So there's that part. But if you read 802, and it's mentioned on one of the previous slides here, if you if you read the spec 802, there is a actual difference between how the IEEE was thinking colon and dash would be interpreted when you look at a MAC address. Luckily, that difference has been marked as, or is considered obsolete and not necessary anymore. So in the colon and the dash from an IEEE perspective are identical now. And I have used that argument. I've said, look, all you got to do is look around. Look at a Cisco router. Look at a Juniper router. Look at your your ASUS router in your house, right? Colons, what's used, right? So that is one of the things, and that's one of the reasons that in my suggestion I said that the IEEE would create a new data type that took out the separator, right? So that we didn't have to worry about that. So yeah, that's all part of the discussion.
Or the separator, where you make it or if you needed to.
I'm sorry?
The separator could be either a colon or a dash.
Yes, but that doesn't solve the problem with matching strings, right? The problem is if I have a device that I'm getting a MAC address from, and then I have an operator that has a MAC address, unless those MAC addresses are identical, they're not going to match, right? And that's the basis of the problem, is because MAC addresses are strings in Yang. Right. If you use them as keys, they have to match exactly. That's kind of the
exactly. Okay,
solve, right?
Understood.
Yeah, yeah, because that was my original. I mean, I stumble into this stuff very naive, right? And I said, well, let's just change the pattern to have both. And they're going, well, that doesn't help you with string. I know. Anyway, so Lou.
So if I understand what you're saying here properly, your options, so do nothing, and then the next one is normalize MAC address, and that's in the IEEE, correct?
Yeah, I would create an IEEE thing, a new data type, or I could do it in the IETF too. I mean, it doesn't matter, but what I was thinking is, since the IEEE owns 802, that they would create a normalized data type that got rid of the problem of string matching, and then we could show the IETF, and if they want to use it, great. If they don't, then we haven't stopped the IETF from doing what the IETF does, right? So
there's actually a couple of options in there. The first one is you go off and do what you've said for the IEEE. Sounds like a great idea to me. Why are you asking the IETF? I mean, that would be my first reaction. And if why you're asking is because part B is you want to do either a joint definition or you want to ask the IETF that we start using this normalized.
Yes, well, that's one of the concerns, right?
Yeah. So which of those, what are you after from us? I mean, to me, yeah, I actually fully buy into that. This is a real issue. If you have linkages between the IEEE and IETF models, this happens, right? So I buy it's a real issue. Yeah, I completely buy it's a real issue. I completely accept that, you guys putting something in the IEEE 802 types is a good idea. But that's not for us to do anything here in the IETF about. What do you want from us?
Well, you said it. You said exactly the issue. The issue is that if we get into a situation where the Yang is, wildly successful, we're 10 years down the road and there's, thousands of IETF Yang models and thousands of IEEE Yang models, and you need to use them at the same time. The suggestion would be, if you're using IEEE and IETF Yang models together and you need to use a MAC address, you need to use the normalized one from the IEEE so you don't have any issues. Right?
Are you going to go back? Is the IEEE going to go back and redo all their models to use this new format?
That would be the thing that we would do during maintenance, right? We would go back and we would add it. We would add it into types, and then we would over time migrate to using the normalized version. Yeah, that would be the plan.
Okay, so all right. I think I understand. This is, excuse me, you're informing us and asking us to make a recommendation in our guidelines.
Yeah.
In our guidelines document to point to this new version. Okay. Looks like other people are too.
And I'm also, you guys are the Yang experts, right? So if there's something that I missed, I'm looking for that. If there is a better way to do this that makes compatible changes easier, backward compatible changes easier, great, let me know. That's the thing. So Italo?
Thank you, Scott. Yes, I was wondering for backward compatibility whether it's better to do an alignment in the pattern and some description that allows at least the backend to do comparison, but without impacting the existing the syntax of the model. That looks to me most conservative approach to solve the problem, and that doesn't preclude doing a normalized for the future, but at least we will not impact the existing models.
Well, that would be that's the second dash under other thoughts, right?
Yep.
That I do like that, and Jan is saying, oh, he might be willing to work on something. So we could. That's the other reason to talk to the IETF. You guys own Yang, right? So if there's something we can do to make Yang work, where we can both have our own patterns and everything works great, then that would certainly be a better solution than having to change the data type that people are using, right? So, Rob?
I just want to make 2 comments. One was actually I'd asked Scott to come and present here.
Thank you.
So that was one thing that the work group should know. And the reason I asked him to present here is I don't think this can be solved in IEEE alone. I think that actually the discussion with Lou that was sort of figured out. And the other point I want to make is the comment that everyone is using the colon and the rest of the world, and this is IEEE's problem. I don't think that's an official IETF position. I wouldn't like that to go back to IEEE as
it does not.
IETF has said. Thank you.
Because I had the same position. Right. It's not no. I don't take anything of this A personally, or B that the organization is speaking, because the organization can't speak.
Thank you.
So Yufeng? Your mic is unmuted, but you're not talking.
Can we hear?
There we go. Yeah, now I can hear you.
As the implementer, so I do hope we have one single consistent format. So in this particular case, IETF format has been defined long before the IEEE, and that's a common convention. So I don't understand why IEEE should keep that format. But as for the implementation, I don't think I want to have the third format, the normalized format, will give me more trouble. I have to convert all three formats in my implication.
Okay, that's good input. So if you can provide that, you provided that, but if you could put that in an email or send it, that would be great. But your other point about the IETF defined using the colon long before, well, that's true from a Yang perspective, but if you read 802, 802 predates the Yang, and 802 said use a dash. So that's not an argument that I can take back to the IEEE and get people to buy into. So, Kent?
Two comments. First, regarding normalized format, I almost think that the normalized format is binary. That we're talking about, MAC or even IP addresses and whatnot. They on the wire, or the stringified format is just what's used on the wire when communicating, like for instance in XML or in JSON, but in CBOR it would be the binary type or whatever. So when you're talking about and from a convenience perspective, when in UI, typically the data entry follows the format of that type as it's defined natively, INET types or whatever. So from a user interface perspective, there's a convenience factor, but it's perfectly possible, and you might consider necessary, or one might think that there's the middle layer, a glue layer that converts between what is actually encoded in JSON or XML or CBOR to a binary type that's in application middleware type memory, and then to the user there's UI that's actually allowing the input to be in whatever it wants, and then kind of does the in-between stuff. So this is in a way non-issue from that perspective. My second comment is that Netmod working group is in the process of revving the Yang types draft, which defines INET types, where this is coming from, and so it's probably not possible to do at this moment, but it seems to me like if we had the semantic versioning stuff that was presented earlier already, that potentially we could consider marking something as obsolete or non-backwards compatible and moving towards a common format. I guess I'm with Chiffon that having a third format doesn't seem convenient or user friendly.
No, that's that was one of my comments before, is that we could leverage we could exercise semantic versioning in this, but there's okay, Rob?
Just going to make one last comment, was that even if we manage to convince the whole world to move to the existing IETF definition, that might still leave us open with the problem of the fact that you're allowed to specify either using uppercase or lowercase.
Yeah, that doesn't solve the whole problem, right?
The definition does say the canonical format is lowercase, and hence that's what you would generate it to, but it does require tooling to actually do that conversion and make sure that when it's comparing these things, it does that conversion. That's probably less significant issue, but it's still a hassle to actually have that problem. That we're being flexible on inputs, nice, but it does have these issues when things get compared.
Yeah, that's right, and it's opposite of what the spec that it's supposed to be implementing says. That's not what 802 says.
Right. Yep.
Anyway, well, that was it. I know I went over a little bit. I apologize for that. So look forward to more discussion on this, and we'll talk about it on our weekly IEEE Yang meetings. I'll work with Rob to find out how we want to gather comments from the IETF and make sure everybody's kept up to speed on how this is moving forward. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you, Scott, and to all the other presenters. I think we are over our time allocation at the moment, and for all those that hung on until now, thank you for that. And unless there's any last minute comments, I think we are done. I see our AD posting something similarly into the chat window, and I don't see my co-chairs joining. So with that, I guess we're through. Thank you again.